But now at 12 midday, it's time for Private Passions with Michael Barclay.
Polly Harvey is one of the most original singer-songwriters working today. And just to give you an idea of what her music sounds like, if you haven't heard it, here is an excerpt from White Chalk, her new album, and this is called The Devil. The Devil, from PJ Harvey's new album, White Chalk. Polly, I sort of sense that you've tackled this programme with the same kind of passion that you bring to creating your songs.
I'm pleased you've said that, because I found it very hard, actually, to begin with, to choose the songs to come to this programme with, and that seemed very daunting to me. So in the end, I actually ended up going to the dictionary for the definition of the word passion, which, if I may, I'll just read a few things from, because it relates to the pieces I've chosen. Anyway, passion in the Chambers Dictionary is the sufferings and death of Christ, suffering, a painful bodily ailment, the fact, condition, or manner of being acted upon, passivity, a passive quality, strong feeling or agitation of mind, especially rage, often sorrow, a fit of such a feeling, especially rage, an expression or outburst of direction of the mind. And then it goes on to passionate, which is moved by passion, showing strong and warm feeling, intense, fervid, compassionate.
Well, that could describe quite a lot of your music.
Well, I'm flattered that you say that, but that became my sort of criteria for choosing the pieces that I wanted to play today. Songs that move me in such a way, but also I feel are played and performed in such a way. And there's so few pieces of music that I've come across in my life that move me to that certain place that I can only describe as the feeling of something coming loose inside one as you're listening to it.
A lot of those definitions apply very exclusively to the kind of abstraction of music, don't they? I mean, that there's a more literal passion very often in literature, in painting, but there is something indefinable about music.
Yes, and I think that's what keeps music being endlessly fascinating for me. And
is that what led you, do you think, into creating song? Because your parents were artists, one of them anyway.
yes, yeah, I looked for a while as to what medium I needed to express through, and I was at art college for a while and thought that it was going to move into sculpture, which was where I seemed to be heading. And my mother is a sculptress.
I mean, it's interesting that a lot of those definitions also conjure up an aspect of human fragility, that we're vulnerable in a way. And I think that's something that comes across with your voice very much, that there was great passion, but also this sort of, as we heard in that song, in the way you actually perform them, there's a kind of fragility and tenderness, which is all part of the human condition, isn't it?
Well, I've always felt the need to be very honest through my own work, and I think it's also what I'm drawn to in other works that I listen to, a certain courage to show one's vulnerability and therefore find something that's very truthful. But it takes a lot of courage to be able to be that open, I think.
Well, we're going to see how you find that in music by composers as various as Vaughan Williams and Arvo Pärt and now Nick Cave. What led you to this particular?
Well, I've sort of chosen a bit of a chronological order as well, because when I was about 17 years old, John Parrish, who has become a lifelong friend of mine and somebody that I continue to work with, in fact, he co-produced White Chalk. He played me, I was playing in John's band at the time. It was the first band I'd ever played in. And I was playing saxophone and guitar. And John said, I think you should hear this. And yeah, I was 17. And I remember very vividly him putting on the album From Her to Eternity in his front room. And he played me 2 tracks from it. He played me From Her to Eternity, which I'm going to play now. And he played Cabin Fever. And it was just one of those moments that I felt everything change. It was as if the ground had been taken away under my feet and I had to start again, and it helped me find my own voice and allow me to express myself in the way that I wanted to but felt was wrong, I guess, up to that point. And suddenly anything seemed possible. And the very sound of this record and my other favourite Bad Seeds record, which is Your Funeral, My Trial, they have such a very particular atmosphere to the whole piece of work. And later on I learned that Flood had produced and worked on both of these records, and I think that they were also both done in Hansa Studios in Berlin, which is notorious for having been an incredible place to work that kind of added a magical quality. And I'm sure you know that certain spaces when you're recording music seem to add some sort of magic that is indefinable, but these studios seem to have that, and a lot of other bands that I've heard recording them have this quality too, but also it's helped by the fact that Flood's there.
It owes a huge amount, doesn't it, to the extreme drive, and certainly the word passion comes in here, of Nick Cave's performance.
Yes, yeah, I think that there's very few voices that I am particularly moved by. I do think that he has an incredible and passionate voice, particularly on that piece that we've just heard. I mean, I feel physically very moved by that piece.
Well, moved and even disturbed in some ways. I mean, and art does disturb.
Yeah, but
it?
it's such a range of different emotions. You feel rage, suffering, beauty, love, longing, everything, and this building and building excitement as that melody goes round and round relentlessly until you almost feel like you need to escape.
From Her to Eternity, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. Actually, it was Nick Cave, I think, Polly Harvey, who introduced you to the next music.
Yes.
And it couldn't be more different. But in some ways, there are things...
I would beg to disagree, actually.
Yeah, all right.
I do think there's a thread that runs through all of my choices, and I wanted to play this piece of music right after the Nick Cave song because it was Nick that introduced me to Arvo Pärt in the beginning, and he also introduced me to Gretzky, and we used to listen to them that a lot. And that, again, opened a doorway for me to this whole world I had known nothing about before. I hear in this piece of music, Fratra, played by, I'd like to mention it's played by Gideon Kremer and Keith Jarrett on piano, but Gideon Kremer, I think, is untouchable for me, the quality that he brings to this piece. And I've heard it played by other players, and it doesn't move me as much as this particular recording. But there's a certain point in this piece of music where I feel exactly the same feeling I get off From Her to Eternity. I mean, again, that moment where I feel like I lose my edges, and you're moved so much by the piece of music that everything else doesn't matter. You lose a sense of who you are and everything. And I hear that in this piece of music too.
I wonder whether that's why there are a certain group of composers, of whom Pärt is certainly one, that have brought contemporary classical music very close to a sort of pop audience, I think, because there is, in the best of pop music, also that spareness, as we've just heard. And maybe that's why composers like Pärt, and I don't know, you can mention Tavener or all sorts of people, Adams, Steve Reich, that minimalism brings something where you come down just to the essentials. On the other hand, one can also say that by some of the sort of Viennese masterpieces by Beethoven and Mozart and Bach. So
yes, yeah.
Maybe it's all just music. At
Maybe,
the end of the day.
I don't know. I mean, that's the beauty of music too, is that it's such a individual taste and choice, and everybody feels differently about everything, and that's what's also endlessly fascinating about it to me.
There is also, and maybe this is another quality, a kind of spirituality about Pärt in particular.
In fact, one of the things I wanted to say about this piece of music in particular, but it seems to have everything to do with life and death all wrapped up in this piece, and in a lot of his work, I think too, that the very meaning of why we live and why we die, I feel like I hear coming out of this piece of music.
He did go back, actually, you know, having been quite avant-garde in his outlook, he went back and studied very early music, medieval music.
Oh,
and
really?
Music was just 2 or 3 lines, yes. And I think he felt that refreshed his entire outlook.
Well, I'm very drawn to early music as well, so maybe that's what draws me to this.
Well, I can see what you mean about it, just keeping to a line and working it.
Yes, like with the Nick Cave piece, where the line keeps going around and around until you're almost wanting this to stop. When will this ever end? You know, I was thinking that too towards the end of this piece, where the violin's almost stabbing and it doesn't seem to stop. It makes me think of the Psycho scene in the shower almost.
Stop, yeah.
When is this going to end? But I was also just thinking I'm going to be exhausted by the end of this, just physically listening to these pieces that move me so much. I'm already feeling done in, and when I'm at home I have to choose very carefully when I play pieces like this. I don't know if you're the same with pieces of music that move you so much, but
I can never listen to it as wallpaper.
No.
Background, it just...
And I have to choose when to play such a piece, because I know it, then I will feel different for hours afterwards. And you have to time it so you're not having to go to a business meeting or something. But
And such fabulous playing too.
oh, just astonishing.
Gidon Kremer and Keith Jarrett playing Fratres by the Estonian composer Arvo Pärt. Now, you do sculpture yourself still, don't you, Polly?
I do a little, not as much as I'd like to, really, from not having time, because I do feel that I'm much more impassioned by just wanting to write music now. Yeah, sometimes I do, but I just make small pieces because I don't have the space or a studio to do big things.
Are you quite disciplined in your sort of composing and songwriting?
Yes, I am. For me, I've developed a way of working over the years that requires an awful lot of research and preparation in order to be available to the chaos of the moment. So I do a lot of research and study towards my work, but always to arrive at that moment when you can throw all of that away and be open to just receive whatever's there. So it's a kind of mixture of the two, of spontaneity and preparation, really.
Again, the next piece was introduced to you by John Parrish.
Yes, and this song I wanted to choose because it's one of a handful of songs, a certain type or family of songs that I'm very drawn to, and I'd describe them as being very short, very succinct, almost a perfect short story of a song wherein just over 2 minutes the whole meaning of life and death and the absurdity of life, the humour, the sadness, everything is summed up completely. It's like a brilliant short story by Flannery O'Connor or Tolstoy or something like that. And there's a few songs that are like that for me, and it's something that I aspire to as well. I think if you can do something that perfect so simply and in such a short space of time, that's something to aim for. And I've chosen a piece by another friend of mine called How Gelb. He was originally in the band Giant Sand and now works as a solo artist. And this is a song called Dear Diary that was actually recorded in John Parrish's front room, I think. But it just seems to capture life and death in the way that all of these pieces that I've chosen have. It helps me make sense of the world and why it's important to be alive in it right now.
Dear diary, I'm a grown man. Why should I be writing to you? Dear diary, I'm sorry to hear you don't want to write to me too. Dear diary, okay, let's start anew. I'll be me and you'll be you. Dear diary, I'm a living life. When I think of war, then it's on TV. If I don't want anything more, then I am free. Dear diary, today I travel some more, somewhere, singing songs, meeting friends. I'm a grown man, and some like what I do. Dear diary, should I keep it up? What else should I do? Just put out and shut up, and then go to war with who? With you, my diary. My diary. My diary. My diary.
I like the way he brings in that slightly metallic sound towards the
Oh
end.
yes, just at the end again, a sort of cyclical outro. I love that piece. It makes me feel the wrestle between the individual and the universal. It's funny because I wasn't sure whether to play this or to choose one of Beethoven's late sonatas. That was on my shortlist as well. It was from Piano Sonata number 31. But I just wanted to mention that because I feel like in those late sonatas, and the ones I listen to are played by Solomon. I love his playing, but I feel again that wrestling.
They're very turbulent.
Yes, but the wrestling of the individual, the individual soul with nature or with the world, or just that sort of fight that goes on. When I listen to that piece by How Gelb, I think very much of those late sonatas too. I mentioned that was one of a handful of songs that I think sum up life so brilliantly in a short space of time, and I just wanted to mention the others because I so wanted to play them but couldn't as well. But one of them was a Bob Dylan piece called Three Angels off of New Morning, which again is a very short description of life in general, and another is by Bonnie Prince Billy, and it's called Raining and Darling, and that's from I See a Darkness. But in the end, How Gelb was the one that...
So we could have had several hours, really, if we...
Oh, God.
And then you really would have been wiped out.
Terrible trying to hone it all down. But again, you can hear the thing that I'm drawn to, which is understatedness, minimalism, simplicity.
Well, I mean, that's exemplified by our next piece, which I think is one of the greatest creations of English music over the last couple of centuries. And it was inspired by early music, in this case Thomas Tallis. And furthermore, I think it was also inspired, you were talking about studios and how important surroundings are. It was inspired by the surroundings of Gloucester Cathedral. And I don't know if you know this, but Vaughan Williams actually imagined the solo instruments being dotted around the cathedral, so they actually had a kind of antiphonal effect.
Yes, I think I had read that somewhere. So you'd hear the movement from this one side of the building to the other.
Yeah. Yes. It is, of course, the Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis by Vaughan Williams. Is this again something that was introduced to you or you just came across?
Well, Mick Harvey introduced this to me, and Mick Harvey, again, I met around the time of meeting all of the Bad Seeds. He's one of the Bad Seeds, but he's also become a good lifelong friend of mine, and I feel blessed to have had so many great teachers in my life, really. I mean, Mick Harvey, John Parrish, Nick Cave, How Gelb, they all became friends that then showed me avenues into other pieces of music I never would have come across. And Mick began to make me wonderful compilation cassettes, it was back then, of classical music. And I really hadn't listened to very much at all. And then I kept asking him for more and more, and listened to that almost exclusively for about the last 3 or 4 years, actually. And I do think that my new record, White Chalk, has come out of that. I only really listened to what Mick was compiling on cassettes for me, and this was one of the pieces that he'd put on.
And it reminds you also of the English countryside, I imagine.
Absolutely. It makes me realise quite how English I am, and it also reminds me of my childhood and where I grew up, which was very much in the woodland of the Dorset countryside. Listening to this piece of music makes me feel the dampness in the air and the dampness in your hair and on your face, and the smell of the leaves that are rotting and everything. It just, but also as a child I had a fantastical imagination, in fact still do, which is probably why I've moved into music. But this piece too makes me think of the fantastical. It makes me think of magic and magicians and kings and queens and fairy tales and everything. It's just rich for the mind to wander in. And yet again, I think is one of the most compassionate pieces of music that I know. And it wasn't until just recently that I learned that he was in the ambulance corps, I think, in World War One, having to deal with body parts and things like that. And
this probably preceded his experience in that, because this was 1910.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. But nevertheless, it shows that aspect of his personality.
Yes.
Music from the Fantasia on a theme by Thomas Tallis by Vaughan Williams. The St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Leonard Slatkin. Well, I don't know if you could have taken much more of that, Polly.
No, I was just, feeling utterly drained as we're going on, because every piece of music is making me want to weep, and in a wonderful way. But,
well, although we were talking about the English countryside there, Polly, Harvey, there was an element I felt almost just before we faded it, where it almost had the rhythm of the sea, didn't it? It was a rocking
Oh,
motion.
yes, and I live by the sea now, and that's probably what I'm hearing there too, but also I was thinking, listening to it then, it's not just the beauty of the English countryside, but it's the savagery of it as well. I mean, there's a lot of suffering and
death too.
And death and violence going on in that piece of music, as well as the beautiful, I think.
That's why I think it's always a pejorative term when people talk about sort of English pastoral music, because in fact the countryside is anything
Exactly.
but in some ways.
Yes, yeah.
Yes. It is actually, funny enough, folk music, isn't it, in a way, that we're going to hear next, or a version of it.
It is. When I was about 22, I think, I was living in a rented apartment in Dorset. And I was renting from a friend of my mother and father's, and it used to be his mother's house, and his mother had been Russian. And there was a wonderful collection of her old furniture, but also of her old Russian 78s, vinyl 78s, and they were still there. And while I was living there, I became absolutely enthralled by them and just wanted to play them all day, every day. And there began a sort of now lifelong fascination with Russia and all things Russian. And so I'm still absolutely fascinated by Russia. In fact, I'm going there to play in the next couple of months. But it led me onto this whole journey of looking at Russian folk music. And again, I'm probably drawn to it because of its passion, its simplicity, its suffering. I mean, I feel in a lot of the Eastern Bloc countries' music, folk music, there's so much suffering. And those people have been oppressed for years and years of hardship and difficult terrain, everything, you name it, they've had it, and you can hear that so much in the music, and I'm so very drawn to it. And this particular song, the Song of the Volga Boatman, I feel so stirred by the fact that there's so many singers as well. I love hearing simple folk song but sung by so many men in such a passionate way. I find that in itself really very moving. wonderful.
We heard the Cossack Orchestra and Singers with Song of the Volga Boatmen. Now, Polly Harvey, interesting that it was actually a painter that managed to sum up the next piece for you, or prompt that choice.
That's true. I very much wanted to include a quote by Roger Hilton that I can remember first writing down when I was at art school, obviously reading some book about him or other, but it came into my mind when I was choosing my last piece of music, which is Nina Simone playing You'll Never Walk Alone instrumentally. And I just wanted to say this before we play it, because there was very little that I could think of that I could put into words about Nina playing this piece. I just couldn't sum it up in words, that's why it's music. But anyway, this is a quote by Roger Hilton, and it says, "All my thinking about art is haunted by a mystical belief that in its practice one is tapping sources of truth. If it were not that one caught, in this practice, glimpses of some certainties, one would not continue it. The painter today is like the ancient alchemist. He is concerned not so much with visible reality as reality tout court. I see art as an instrument of truth, or it is nothing." And I think that Nina Simone never fails to capture that truth for me.
extraordinary how she manages to inflect the piano line with the same kind of vocal phrasing that she might have used to sing it, or in fact she did use to sing it sometimes. Because in some ways the virtuosity of what she's doing is almost Rachmaninoff-like, and yet she manages to phrase the melody as though she was singing it.
Yes, and with the same passion that she would have sung it with. I think that's why it's so moving.
Well, thank you very much, Polly Harvey, for compounding my theory that, in fact, we are all drawn more inexorably to sad music that moves us than almost any other.
Well, yeah, I did realise that after I'd chosen these songs to play, just how sad they all were, and yet at the same time so joyous, really. And again, going back to what I was saying about feeling something come open inside oneself as you listen to a piece of music is actually a celebration of a sort as well.
Probably because we want to be moved. So there's joy in the fact that sadness can move us.
Yes, and when one's moved so much, you really do know that you're alive.
PJ Harvey was talking to Michael Barclay. Well, next Sunday at the same time, Michael's guest on Private Passions will be Lord Colin Lowe, who's the chairman of the Royal National Institute of Blind People. Private Passions is a classic arts production for BBC Radio 3. The producer of today's edition was Sarah Cropper.